The day I left for the Army was the day I felt my heart break for the first time. Not because I was leaving my fans or my career behind, but because I was leaving my mom. She was the one who always stood by me, the one who believed in me when no one else did. She was the one who made everything okay, no matter how bad things got. I remember standing at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, surrounded by a sea of people. Fans were screaming, photographers were flashing their cameras, and reporters were shouting questions. But all I could think about was my mom, lying in her grave back in Memphis. She had passed away just a few months before, and the pain was still fresh. I felt like a part of me was missing. "Elvis, Elvis, can you hear us?" a reporter yelled. I nodded, trying to keep it together. I didn't want to show any weakness, not in front of everyone, but inside I was a mess. "Elvis, can you say a few words about your mom?" another reporter asked. I took a deep breath, looking out at the crowd. My eyes started to water, but I blinked them back. I had to be strong. "Everyone loves their mother," I began, my voice steady but thick with emotion. But I was the only child, and my mom was always right there with me. Losing her wasn't just losing a mother. It was like losing a best friend, someone I could talk to about anything. I could wake her up in the middle of the night, and she'd always be there to help me. She was always there. I paused, trying to find the right words. I used to get angry at her when I was growing up. You know, when you want to do something and your mom says no. But later, you realize she was just trying to protect you, and I'm really glad she was strict. I'm glad she taught me to be a good person. She was always there, and I'll always miss her. The crowd fell silent, and I could feel the weight of their sympathy, but it didn't make the pain go away. I knew I had to keep going for her. I had to be the man she raised me to be. After the press conference, I walked to the ship that would take me to Germany. The fans lined the dock, waving and cheering. I waved back, trying to smile. But inside, I was saying goodbye to my mom one last time. I promised her I would make her proud, no matter what. As the ship pulled away from the dock, I looked back at the crowd. I saw faces I would never forget, faces of people who loved me and supported me. I knew I had a long road ahead, but I also knew I wasn't alone. My mom's love and her lessons would guide me every step of the way. The ocean was rough and the ship swayed back and forth. I found a quiet spot on deck and closed my eyes. I thought about the life I had left behind, the life I was about to start, and the memories that would always be with me. I thought about my mom, and I knew I would carry her with me, no matter where I went. When I was 13, my family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. It was a big change from the small town of Tupelo, Mississippi, but my dad had found a better job, and we all hoped things would get easier. We settled into a public housing project where the rent was low, and everyone around us was in the same boat. My mom worked hard to keep our home nice, even though money was always tight. She took any job she could find waitressing, working in a hospital, you name it. But no matter how tough it got, she always kept a smile on her face and made sure we had a place to call home. I started high school at L.C. Humes, and it was there that I met some of the best friends I'd ever have. One of them was George Klein. He was the school paper's editor and the president of the senior class. George had a way of remembering the little things, and he told me years later that he first noticed me when we were singing Christmas carols. I sang a country western song called Cold, Cold, Icy Fingers, and something about the way I sang it stuck with him. He said it was different, and that's what made me stand out. My teachers thought I was a good kid, gentle and obedient. They said I always tried my best to do what they asked. But what they didn't know was that I was really just trying to make my mom and dad proud. I wanted to be the kind of son they could count on, especially since we didn't have much. I remember one teacher saying I had a warm, sunny quality about me. I guess that must have been true, because people always seemed to like being around me. After school, I started helping out by working as an usher at the Lowe's State Theater. It wasn't much, just $14 a week, but every little bit helped. When I graduated from high school, I got a job driving a truck for the Crown Electric Company. It paid $35 a week, and it felt like a fortune back then. I was proud of myself for being able to contribute to the family, even if it was just a little. One of the best things I did for my mom was to record a song for her birthday. I went to the Sun Record Company and paid $4 to make a record of my voice. I sang "That's All Right, Mama," and I carried it home to her under my arm. She was so happy, and I could see the pride in her eyes. Little did I know that the man who owned the record company, Sam Phillips, was listening. He heard something in my voice that he liked, and he told me he might call me back for an audition. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it turned out to be the start of something big. A year went by, and I didn't hear from Sam. Then, one day, he called and asked me to come in for a recording session. I was nervous, but I did what he asked, and we recorded "That's All Right, Mama" and "Blue Moon of Kentucky." Sam gave me a contract, and I felt like I was on top of the world. The record came out in the summer of 1954, and I was so scared that I went to the movies on the night it was supposed to play on the radio. But while I was hiding, the station started getting calls and telegrams. The disc jockey, Dewey Phillips, had to play my song 7 times because people couldn't get enough of it. In just 1 week, 7,000 copies were sold in Memphis. After that, things started moving fast. A man named Colonel Tom Parker signed on as my business manager, and he brought in my guitar player, Scotty Moore, and my bass player, Bill Black. We started touring, and I became known as the Hillbilly Cat. One day, I was booked to perform at a disc jockeys convention in Nashville, and that's where Steve Scholes from RCA Victor heard me sing. He had been keeping an eye on me since my first record, and he saw that I had developed my own style. Steve went to Sam Phillips and offered him $35,000 for all my recordings. It was a lot of money for a new artist, but Steve believed in me. As a bonus, I got $5,000, which I used to buy my first Cadillac. RCA Victor released all my records at once, and before I knew it, I was on national TV. I appeared on the Jackie Gleason Show and sang "Heartbreak Hotel." After 6 shows, my record became a huge hit, and I was the talk of the town. I flew to Hollywood for a screen test and appeared on the Milton Berle Show. Some critics didn't like the way I moved when I sang, but the fans loved it. They saw that it was just my way of expressing myself, and they couldn't get enough. I appeared on the Steve Allen Show, and then got a big deal to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. I also signed a movie contract with Hal Wallis, and my first film, Love Me Tender, was a big success. I made more movies after that, and each one did better than the last. But no matter how much I achieved, I never forgot where I came from and the people who made it all possible. I bought my parents a nice house in Memphis, and later, when I could afford it, I moved them into a beautiful mansion called Graceland. My mom and dad were always there for me, and I wanted to make sure they had everything they needed. My mom, especially, was a big part of my life. She was always there to support me, and she was the best mom a boy could ask for. She even came to my shows when she could, and I loved having her there. But life wasn't always easy. In 1958, just before I was drafted into the Army, my mom got sick. I rushed home to be with her, but she didn't make it. She passed away on August 14th, 1958, and it was the hardest thing I ever went through. I was heartbroken, but I knew I had to be strong. I went back to my duties in the Army, and a month later, I was shipped to Germany. I brought my dad with me, and we lived in a house near my base. It wasn't easy, but I did my best to be a good soldier and serve my country. When I came back from Germany in 1960, my fans were still there, and they were as supportive as ever. I knew that my mom wasn't there to see it, but I felt her presence every day. She had given me so much, and I was determined to make her proud, no matter what. I knew that no matter where my life took me, I would always remember the love and support she gave me, and I would carry that with me forever. I remember when I got my first real job as a truck driver. It felt good to be able to help my family. My dad worked in a paint factory, and we had moved out of the housing project, but money was still tight. I only made around $35 a week, but I was proud of it. I wanted to do something special for my mom's birthday, so I decided to make a record for her. I saved up my whole week's salary and went to Sam Phillips' recording studio. I was nervous, but I did it anyway. Sam liked what he heard and wrote my name down. Mom was really happy with her birthday gift. But the best part was when Sam called me back to make a commercial record. This time I got paid for it. The song was called "That's All Right, Mama." After that, things started to change quickly. I made more records, did personal appearances, and even appeared on TV shows and in movies. Within 3 years, I went from being a poor truck driver to one of the most famous entertainers in the country. I had more money than I ever thought possible. The first thing I did with my newfound wealth was to buy a nice home for my parents. I wanted them to be comfortable and happy. I built a swimming pool, bought them fancy cars, and filled the house with all sorts of luxuries. They were thrilled, but it didn't last long. My fans started showing up at all hours, ringing the doorbell, and even trying to get into the house. It was too much for my parents, especially my mom. She became shy and stayed inside a lot. I knew I had to do something to protect them, so I bought a big, fancy house with a high stone wall. It was a beautiful place, and I hoped it would give them the privacy they needed. I also made sure to take them with me when I went on tours or made movies. I loved having my family around. They were everything to me. When I was drafted into the Army, the only thing that really worried me was leaving my mom. She was my best girl, and I didn't want to be away from her. But I had to go, and I did my best to stay in touch. My parents visited me at Fort Hood a few times, and we talked about maybe going to Germany together. But that didn't happen. One day while I was in the Army, my mom got sick. She had hepatitis, and it was serious. My commanding officer gave me emergency leave, and I rushed home. When I saw her, she was so weak, but she still managed to smile and tell me everything would be okay. I stayed with her as much as I could, but it wasn't enough. A few days later, she passed away. It was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I was devastated. The funeral was held in a downtown chapel, and thousands of fans came to say goodbye. It was overwhelming, but it showed how much my mom meant to everyone. The service was beautiful, and the Blackwood Brothers Quartet sang her favorite song, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord." When it was time to say goodbye at the graveside, I couldn't hold it together. I leaned on her casket and cried out, "Goodbye, darling, I loved you so much." After the funeral, I spent some time at home with my dad. We were both heartbroken, but we had each other. I had to go back to the Army, but I promised myself I would do everything I could to make my mom proud. A few months later, when I came home from the Army, Frank Sinatra threw me a welcome party. It was a big deal, and I was grateful. But the most important thing was that I was back with my family. I knew my mom would be proud of me, and I could almost hear her saying, "Well done, Elvis." One evening, I left the set of Loving You and headed toward a side street exit in my shiny Cadillac. The street was packed with teenagers, just like every other time I left the set. As I stopped to sign autographs, I joked with a girl, asking her what she did for a living. She was in 7th grade, and we laughed about it. Then I looked into my rearview mirror and saw something that made me nudge my cousin, Jean. Several teenagers were gliding their hands back and forth on the back of my car, collecting dust. They were carefully putting the dust into envelopes. It was like they thought my car dust was as magical as stardust. I chuckled. Crazy man, everything sure is CRAZY. Life had changed so much since those days in Tupelo and Memphis. My life had turned into a 5-ring circus, and sometimes it felt like I was holding onto a bear by the tail, unable to let go. Simple things like going to a restaurant or taking a girl to a movie were now surrounded by fans. Once, while I was inside a theater in Memphis, girls wrote love messages in lipstick on my car. The fame was a double-edged sword, and I was still learning to balance it. During the last presidential election, I even got a few write-in votes for president. A 200-pound hog named Elvis won a contest in Chicago. Mothers named their babies after me. It was all a bit surreal. Even the biggest stars in Hollywood found reasons to stop by my table at the studio commissary. Dean Martin once brought his son to meet me and joked about borrowing a hit. At Paramount, I was given Anna Magnoni's dressing room and a bicycle with Hound Dog printed on it. Phone calls from all over the world came in every 5 minutes, and I used to answer them all until it became impossible. Not everything was light and funny, though. Almost every entertainer made fun of my style. I watched headliners in 6 different Las Vegas hotels spoof me. I didn't like being called the pelvis, but I didn't say much about it. Sometimes it felt like the only way to avoid more controversy. One time, a rabbi in Culver City defended me after a judge criticized my hair and me. The rabbi said that parents who ranted about me were just using me as a scapegoat for their own failures. He said I symbolized youth and success, and that wasn't a bad thing. It was nice to have someone speak up for me. In Hollywood, I had a bit more freedom than back home in Memphis. In Hollywood, I was just one of many famous people, so I wasn't as much of a novelty. But in Memphis, things were different. When I bought my parents a house on Audubon Drive, the street became a busy thoroughfare. The neighbors, who liked us, were tired of the crowds and traffic. They formed a committee and asked my parents to sell the house. I was furious when I heard about it. I couldn't control the crowds any more than they could, but I didn't know what to do. When I was in Hollywood, I stayed at the Knickerbocker Hotel, and the hotel gave me and my entourage the entire 11th floor. My band DJ, Bill and Scotty were always with me, and they even played for Tab Hunter's recordings. In the hotel, I used the service elevator to avoid the crowds in the lobby. Up in my suite, I could finally have some peace and quiet. It was a small break from the chaos, but it was enough to keep me going. I feel safer in my rooms. Out in the world, there are always people who want a piece of me. Some rip my clothes or make rude comments, looking for a fight. I love my success, but sometimes it means I can't just walk down the street without being stopped. So, I spend a lot of time at the hotel in Hollywood with my cousin, some musician friends, and a few girls. We cook our favorite dishes, watch TV, and play records. The girls often bring their favorite music, and we usually end the night listening to my own songs, even the ones that haven't come out yet. I call my family in Memphis every night when I'm in Hollywood. Sometimes I call girls I've met, while on tour in different cities, and talk for hours. When I'm on the road, I usually stay up all night, but in Hollywood, I try to go to bed early because I have to be at the studio by 7 or 8 in the morning. Sometimes when I get tired of being in the hotel, I go to a movie. One night, I went to a studio screening of Gunfight at the OK Corral. I was really excited when I saw my producer, Hal Wallis' name on the screen, and I clapped like crazy. I wasn't trying to butter him up. I was just happy to see a familiar name. I met Cecil B. DeMille at a party, and he asked if I'd seen The 10 Commandments. I told him it was crazy, man, and gave him a pat on the back. I was just being honest. People say a lot of things about my money and my relationship with my manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Some say we're at odds, but that's not true. I love working with the Colonel. He takes care of my money, and my dad keeps the books. In 1956, I made about $1 million, not the $3 million they say. On tour, I can make $50,000 a week, and I get a few cents for every record I sell. My company, Presley Enterprises, sells 32 different products, which helps a lot too. The Colonel always stands up for me. He says I don't really rock and roll. I just sit and jump when I sing. He says I don't bump or grind. I just undulate naturally. It's the music that makes me move. And about the whole Elvis the pelvis thing, the Colonel says, everybody has a pelvis. Joe Gray, my stand-in, was skeptical at first, but now he's a big fan. He says the Presley name is magic, and that it makes girls want to go out with him. He says I'm a great guy, nice to everyone, and that I'm just a regular person. My life is full of changes, and sometimes it's hard to keep up. I used to pose for pictures with anyone who asked, but I learned that some people just wanted to exploit me. One girl even sued me over a photo. The Colonel had to settle it for $5,000. Now, I'm more careful about who I pose with. I've also changed the way I dress. Some people criticized my clothes, so I thought about it and made some changes. I still wear my stage outfits, but for every day, I stick to plain jackets and shirts. I even bought a white leather shirt, but mostly, I dress like a regular guy. I've learned to adapt to new situations. I try to learn from my experiences and not just brush them off. I believe that if you really try, the good Lord won't let you down. I don't always want my good deeds to be publicized. I like to help people quietly, without drawing attention to myself. I helped build a park in my hometown of Tupelo, Mississippi, where I used to live. The city didn't have a safe place for kids to play, so I promised to help. I played a benefit show, and we raised over $20,000. The park will have all kinds of great things for kids, and it will be named after me. I've done a lot of other things to help too. I sang at a baseball park for 2 charities and raised $6,000 for each. I surprised an audience at a show for St. Jude Hospital, which helps sick kids. I bought all the Christmas cards from some little girls on the street and sent a personal picture to a girl named Cheryl who was very sick. My picture made her feel better, and she lived a little longer because of it. I've given a lot to Memphis, especially during the holidays. Even when I was in the Army, I sent money to help feed people. I've also donated animals to the zoo and bought tickets for a high school football game to help blind people. I love giving gifts to the people I care about. My girlfriend, Anita, has gotten a lot of presents from me, like a ring with a big diamond and sapphires and a car. I treat my family really well, too. I've given them houses, cars, and all kinds of things. I even gave my mom a collection of expensive hats and a pink Cadillac. My life is always changing, but I try to stay true to myself. I believe that if you do your best and help others, good things will happen. I sauntered into the studio commissary feeling really beat. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Gene Smith, my cousin, and Cliff Gleaves, a buddy from Memphis, were there with me. I usually order the same thing every day: mashed potatoes with gravy, sauerkraut, bacon, and 2 glasses of milk. But today, I just didn't feel like eating. The waitress asked if I wanted my usual, but I just shook my head and told her I'd have a fruit gelatin with whipped cream instead. I was more thoughtful than usual, thinking about the night before. It was another one of those nights where everything seemed to go wrong. I attract a lot of girls, sure, but getting to know them is a whole different story. When I go out with a girl, it's usually a mob scene. We can't just have a normal date. It's like everything, and everyone is trying to stop us. One time I took Jonna Lund, a pretty starlet from Jailhouse Rock, out on a date. I picked her up in one of my Cadillacs around 7 p.m. We talked about what to do, but going dancing was out of the question. We decided on a movie, but as soon as we got to the theater, fans started swarming us. We had to leave without seeing the picture. We tried going to a restaurant, but the same thing happened. Fans appeared out of nowhere, and we had to leave without eating. So we ended up driving around for hours, just talking. We drove from Hollywood to Santa Monica, then up the coast to Malibu Beach. We talked about our lives, our families, and our dreams. It was the first time I felt like I could really connect with someone. But even then, we couldn't just sit and have a normal conversation. We kept getting interrupted by fans. Around midnight, we decided to get some coffee and cokes at a drive-in. But even there, fans found us. We had to leave quickly. We drove back to Hollywood, but we didn't stop. We kept talking, laughing, and singing. I told her about my early life in the South, my family, and the big house I bought for them. She told me about her life in show business and her dreams of being a singer and an actress. We drove for hours just talking. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I finally dropped her off at her house. I had driven almost 300 miles that night, just to have a few hours alone with her. Driving has become my only solution to being alone with a girl. The more successful I get, the more my personal privacy becomes a problem. I want to belong, to have a close circle of friends and girls who like me for who I am, not because I'm famous. But the higher I climb, the lonelier I get. I miss home, but even when I'm there, I get restless after a week. I guess I'm just waiting for the day when I can settle down. One time, I met a lady columnist at a party. I told her she looked young, and she became a fan right then and there. People who meet me usually say I'm a nice, gentlemanly guy, but I've been criticized a lot. Some say my music is pornographic, which isn't true. I've been to burlesque shows, and I know what obscene means. I'd never do that. I want to perform for teenagers, and I'd never do anything that could hurt them. Bing Crosby said I need more training and more diverse material. He said I should learn how to act in sketches and do comedy songs. I get where he's coming from, but I'm trying new things all the time. I did Love Me Tender to show I can do ballads. I'm always trying to grow and improve. Some people say I slouch, but I just stand the way I'm most comfortable, and my sideburns, they're not going anywhere. I've grown used to them and I like them. They remind me of my truck driver idols from when I was a kid. Being famous has its perks, but it's also tough. I'm just a guy trying to find my place in the world, like everyone else. But for now, I'll keep driving those highways, trying to find a little peace and a bit of normalcy. I used to live near the highway in Tupelo, Mississippi. I'd see truck drivers with their shirts off, handkerchiefs around their necks, and wearing sideburns and mustaches. I thought they were the coolest. My dream was to look like them and drive a big rig. But now I don't see much point in shaving off my sideburns. They've become a part of who I am, so why change something that works? I had to consider shaving them off when I joined the Army, though. Nobody in the Army has ever avoided getting a close haircut, I thought. It was a reality I had to face. One of the things that really gets to me is how columnists talk about my love life. You take a girl out twice, and all of a sudden you're engaged to marry her, they say. But the truth is, I've never even thought about getting married. I've been so busy in the past year or two that I haven't had time for anything but my work. People often criticize my fans, saying they're wild and senseless, but I know better. Sure, they get a little enthusiastic, but they've never been destructive. They've never torn up seats or ruined a theater. Adults just don't understand. When you're young, you have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. You've got to let it out somehow. That's what kids do when they see my shows. I get a kick out of watching them. They get a little rambunctious sometimes, but you can't control everything. Part of the show is for them to let themselves go. The most fun I have in show business is doing personal appearances. I don't like going out on the road for a month because it wears you out, but going out for 5 days is really fun. You see new places, meet new people, and have an exciting time, but personals can be pretty risky. I've had my hair pulled and gotten a few scratches, and I've lost a few suits of clothes. One time in Kansas City, the crowd got so hysterical that I had to be carried out. Now there are always at least 30 people to guard my entrance and exit. After personals, I like doing movies best. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm getting better. I'm not too happy with television, though. My first big hit was on the Dorsey Brothers show, but then I did a spot with Milton Berle and got a lot of criticism for my movements. When I appeared with Steve Allen, I had to wear evening clothes and avoid moving, which I didn't like. I liked working with Ed Sullivan, but I wasn't too pleased with how the cameras shot me from the waist up on the last show. I'm done with my commitments with Sullivan now, and I hope I'll have more control over how I'm presented on TV in the future. I came away from these experiences with a different impression of myself. I'm just an earnest young guy who wants to grow as a performer. I'm soft-spoken and never brash, and I don't criticize other performers. I'm polite and respectful, and I'm really enjoying life. I don't try to plan ahead or foresee what I'll be doing in the future. I take each day as it comes and try to do my best. So far, things have been going well, and I hope they continue that way. When it comes to dating, it's not as glamorous as people think. I can't go to public places or nightclubs because I get mobbed. I go to drive-ins with my date, but we can't get out of the car. If I want to eat, one of my buddies orders food and brings it back to the car. At home, we swim, listen to records, or sit on the porch. It's simple, but that's what works. I've dated a lot of girls, but it's always the same pattern. I give them a mad rush, and that's it. I can't sit still long enough to maintain a permanent romance. I travel so much that it's hard to ask a girl to wait for me. I'm married to my career, and it's a sensational one. I'm affectionate, but I can't be tied down right now. When I'm in a city for a while, I date the girls I'm attracted to. I like simple, cute, and naive girls. They must be pretty, vivacious, and agreeable. I have to be in charge, and I don't like gold diggers. I don't go in for extremely lavish gifts. I'm still a small-town boy at heart, and I don't like to spend money freely. I'm devoted to my family, and when I get married, I'll be a devoted and loving husband. I remember a time when a hard-boiled public relations man named Jack McGuire came to one of my concerts in Chicago. He was skeptical about me, thinking I was just another star who let fame go to my head. But when I showed up late for a press conference, something changed. I was warm, human, and a gentleman. I posed with a little girl's dog and gave an interview to some disc jockeys from Detroit. By the end of the night, Jack and everyone else were convinced that I was the real deal. They saw that I was a tremendously successful star, who had retained my humility. Even my singing, which he initially doubted, impressed him. He realized that I was more than just a performer. I was a perfectionist at my music. That night, I talked to Jack about my career, my family, and my fans. I told him that I hoped I could live up to their confidence in me. I was just a kid from Tupelo, but I was doing my best to be the best I could be. I grew up with Elvis in the small town of East Tupelo, Mississippi. We were cousins, and I always felt a bit responsible for him, even though he was a good kid. One time, when we were kids, we were sitting on a neighbor's porch arguing about Santa Claus. I was 13, and I thought I was so smart trying to tell Elvis that Santa wasn't real. He was only 10, but he wouldn't budge. He said he was going to ask his mom, and I knew he would believe whatever she told him. His mom was his whole world, and he never did anything to make her sad. We played a lot together, just like any other boys. We made guns to shoot rubber bands, played cowboys and Indians, and had a blast. The thing was, Elvis never got into any trouble. He was always respectful, and never fought or talked back to adults. He was a jokester, just like his dad, but he had a good heart. Elvis had a special bond with his family, especially his mom. He'd call her all the time when he was away, always asking how she was doing. He even called her baby when he got older. His mom was protective too. She'd come with him when he played at our house, just to keep an eye on him. She lost his twin brother, so Elvis was her only child, and she cherished him. When Elvis was in my class, our teacher, Mrs. Grimes, noticed his talent. He sang Old Shep so beautifully that it made everyone cry. She encouraged him to enter a singing contest at the fair, and he won, even though he had to borrow a guitar. That was the start of something big. Years later, Elvis became famous, but he never forgot his roots. He visited our town in a big, cream-colored car. I was sitting on the porch when he pulled up, and I almost thought he was a salesman. But when he called out to me, I recognized him right away. He hugged me and said he couldn't stay long because he had to be in Atlanta in a few hours, but he couldn't pass by without saying hello. Elvis was always the same person, no matter how famous he got. He cared about his family and his friends, and he never lost sight of who he was. The last time I saw him, he was still that same boy from East Tupelo, with a big heart and a dream that never faded.